The Magnolia Grand Hotel loomed against the storm-ridden sky, a Victorian monument to a forgotten era. Its silhouette was a jagged edge against the bruised twilight. Built in 1888, the hotel had once been a beacon of luxury. Now it stood decrepit and forlorn, a brooding sentinel overlooking the windswept coast. Each window was a vacant eye staring out at the world. The paint peeled like scabs, revealing the rotting wood beneath. Its grandeur had faded, replaced by an unsettling aura of decay. Jenna and Mark arrived late, their car battling against the fury of the storm. Rain lashed against the windscreen, blurring the already indistinct road. The headlights flickered across the wrought iron gates, momentarily illuminating the hotel's name in tarnished gold lettering. A solitary figure awaited them in the cavernous lobby. The receptionist, a gaunt man with unsettlingly pale eyes, greeted them without a smile. His voice was a dry rasp, as if unused for decades. "Welcome to the Magnolia Grand," he croaked. "You're the only guests." Their room, number 13, was located at the end of a dimly lit hallway. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp and decay. Dust lay thick on the antique furniture. A chill permeated the very walls, seeping into their bones. As Jenna unpacked, she felt a cold draft. It seemed to emanate from the wardrobe, its ornate door slightly ajar. A whisper, barely audible, seemed to form in the air. "Get out!" it hissed. Jenna quickly shut the wardrobe door, her heart pounding in her chest. Later that evening, they ventured out of their room to explore. The air was thick with an unsettling silence, as if the hotel itself was holding its breath. They exchanged nervous glances, but curiosity got the better of them. The hotel was eerily silent, the only sound the creaking of floorboards beneath their feet. Each step echoed through the empty halls, amplifying their sense of isolation. The dim lighting cast long, eerie shadows that seemed to dance on the walls. Each corridor seemed to lead to another, twisting and turning in a dizzying labyrinth. It was as if the hotel was designed to confuse and disorient its guests. They tried to keep track of their path but soon found themselves hopelessly lost. They stumbled upon a dusty old library, its shelves lined with leather-bound books. The room was filled with the musty scent of aged paper and forgotten stories. Cobwebs hung from the corners, undisturbed for years. Mark pulled out a heavy volume, its pages brittle with age. The cover was worn and faded, but the title was still legible. It was a guest ledger, a record of everyone who had ever stayed at the hotel. It was the guest ledger, its entries dating back to the hotel's opening. The pages were yellowed with age, and the ink had faded to a dull brown. Each entry told a story, a glimpse into the lives of the hotel's past guests. One entry, written in a spidery scrawl, sent shivers down their spines. It spoke of strange occurrences, of guests who had vanished without a trace. The handwriting was shaky, as if the writer had been in a state of panic. The walls whisper, "They hunger." The words seemed to come alive, echoing in the silence of the library. They could almost hear the whispers, faint and distant, as if the walls themselves were speaking. A chill ran down their spines as they realized they were not alone in the hotel. The shadows seemed to move, to shift and change, as if something was lurking just out of sight. They felt a growing sense of dread, a feeling that something terrible was about to happen. The hotel was no longer just a building, it was a living, breathing entity, and it was watching them. Intrigued and disturbed, they continued to read. Each entry in the ledger hinted at a dark and sinister history. Guests wrote of strange noises, cold spots, and fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures. Several entries mentioned Room 13, their room, as a focal point of these unsettling events. One entry, dated 1905, described a young couple who had checked into Room 13 and vanished without a trace. Their disappearance remained unsolved. The ledger ended abruptly after that entry, leaving a chilling silence in its wake. Back in their room, Jenna felt a growing sense of unease. The vintage hotel room with its old-fashioned decor and dim lighting seemed to close in on her. The wallpaper, once elegant, now appeared faded and worn, adding to the room's eerie atmosphere. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, even though she was alone. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. She caught her reflection in the antique mirror above the fireplace. The mirror, with its ornate frame and slightly tarnished glass, seemed to hold secrets of its own. Jenna's eyes were drawn to it, almost as if it was calling to her. She moved closer, her breath fogging up the glass slightly. Her reflection stared back at her, but something felt off. The room behind her in the mirror seemed darker, more sinister. For a fleeting moment she saw a figure standing behind her, a shadowy silhouette with eyes that glowed with an eerie light. The figure was tall and indistinct, its features obscured by the darkness. Jenna's heart raced as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. Was it a trick of the light? Her mind playing tricks on her? She blinked, hoping the figure would disappear, but it remained, its glowing eyes fixed on her. She spun around, but the room was empty. Had she imagined it? The shadows in the corners seemed to shift and move, but there was no one there. Jenna's breathing became shallow as she tried to calm herself. She told herself it was just her imagination, but the feeling of being watched persisted. She glanced back at the mirror, but the figure was gone. The room felt colder, and the air seemed heavier. The whispers returned, louder this time. They seemed to come from all around her, echoing off the walls. Jenna strained to hear what they were saying, but the words were indistinct, like a distant conversation just out of earshot. The whispers grew more insistent, filling her with a sense of dread. She covered her ears, but the voices seemed to penetrate her very mind. "Leave, while you still can," they hissed. The words were clear now, and they sent a chill down Jenna's spine. The voice was neither male nor female, but something in between, and it carried a sense of urgency. Jenna's mind raced as she tried to understand what was happening. Why was she hearing these voices? What did they want from her? The room seemed to grow darker, the shadows closing in. The temperature in the room plummeted. Jenna could see her breath in the air, and frost began to form on the windows. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to ward off the sudden chill. The cold seemed to seep into her bones, making her shiver uncontrollably. The whispers continued, growing louder and more insistent. Jenna felt a sense of impending doom, as if something terrible was about to happen. Jenna felt a cold hand grip her arm. The touch was icy and sent a jolt of fear through her. She looked down, but there was nothing there, just the sensation of fingers digging into her skin. Panic set in as she tried to pull away, but the grip tightened. It felt as if the very air around her was alive, pressing in on her from all sides. She screamed, pulling away from the unseen grip. Her voice echoed through the empty room, but there was no one to hear her. The grip finally released, and Jenna stumbled back, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked around, but the room was still empty. The whispers had stopped and the temperature began to rise again, but the sense of unease remained, and Jenna knew that whatever had happened, it wasn't over. The haunting in the mirror had only just begun. Panic surged through them. They had to get out, escape the suffocating dread that had enveloped them. Mark raced to the door, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if an unseen force was holding it shut. He threw his weight against it again and again, but it remained firmly locked. Jenna grabbed a heavy bookend from the nightstand, desperation lending her strength. She smashed it against the old-fashioned lock. With a splintering crack, the lock gave way. They stumbled out of the room, slamming the door shut behind them. They ran, their footsteps echoing in the silent hallways. The air grew colder, the shadows seeming to stretch and twist, reaching out towards them with grasping claws. The whispers followed, a chorus of tormented souls echoing through the hotel. They finally burst out of the main entrance into the stormy night. Rain soaked them to the bone, but they didn't care. They had escaped the clutches of the Magnolia Grand, its malevolent presence fading with each step they took away from its grounds. As they drove away, the storm began to subside. The heavy rain that had pounded the car's roof all night was now just a light drizzle, and the thunder that had roared so menacingly was now a distant rumble. The road ahead, slick and glistening, seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon, offering a promise of safety and normalcy that felt almost too good to be true. The first rays of dawn pierced through the retreating clouds, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. It was a breathtaking sight, a stark contrast to the chaos and fear that had gripped them just hours before. The colors of the sky seemed to symbolize a new beginning, a fresh start after a nightmarish ordeal. Yet despite the beauty of the dawn, an uneasy feeling lingered in the air. They didn't speak, the terror of the night still fresh in their minds. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken fears and unanswered questions. Each was lost in their own thoughts, replaying the events of the night over and over again. The car's engine hummed softly, a comforting sound in the otherwise tense atmosphere. They both knew that words would be inadequate to describe what they had experienced. Glancing back at the receding silhouette of the Magnolia Grand, Jenna noticed something strange. The hotel, which had seemed so imposing and malevolent in the darkness, now looked almost ordinary in the early morning light. But there was something about it that still sent a chill down her spine. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the hotel was somehow aware of their departure. In a top-floor window, a single light flickered, as if watching them. It was a small, almost imperceptible detail, but it caught Jenna's eye immediately. The light seemed to pulse with a life of its own, a silent signal that their presence had been noted. She felt a shiver run down her spine and she quickly looked away, hoping that it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. The light winked out, leaving them in no doubt that they had escaped the hotel, but the hotel had not finished with them. It was as if the Magnolia Grand had a mind of its own, a malevolent consciousness that reached out to them even as they drove away. The sense of unease grew stronger, and Jenna couldn't help but wonder what other secrets the hotel held. They had left the physical confines of the hotel, but its shadow still loomed large over them, a dark presence that refused to let go.